Here is episode 2 on what if Naruto was the successor of Lord Zeus. Now let's move on to the video. Final exams, creepy old ladies, and poker. The remaining weeks at school passed by quickly. Every once in a while, Naruto or Percy would try and surprise people with a question about Mrs. Dodds, but to no avail. The only one who ever had any kind of a reaction to that name was Grover. It was painfully obvious that he was lying about it because of the fact that he hesitated before answering. From all this, Percy and Naruto had found out nothing more than that Grover was a horrible liar. Meanwhile, the weather was slowly getting worse. The never-ending storms were taking their toll on everyone. Percy's grade slipped from CS and DS to solid FS, while Naruto's grade slipped from BS to low CS. Percy was getting in more pointless fights that Naruto usually had to finish. Normally, Naruto would just stand there until someone tried to make him join in, after which Naruto knocked everyone out and claimed self-defense. Unfortunately, Naruto wasn't there all the time and Percy blew up in one of his classes, resulting in Percy being kicked out at the end of the year. He really didn't care though. He was somewhat homesick. As a result, Percy didn't study for any of his exams, save one. Percy had always claimed that Mr. Brunner was his favorite teacher. To the blonde it seemed though that Mr. Brunner had always been looking after Percy, maybe even more so than giving him correct marks on wrong answers. Right now though, Percy was getting really frustrated with his book. Arg. Who would remember this anyway? Percy yelled as he threw his book across the room, which had perfect aim of a sleeping Naruto's head. Ah! Naruto yelled as he was woken by a particularly big book hitting him on the back of the head. He bolted up, thinking he was under attack thanks to ninja training, but ended up hitting his head on the top of his bunk. The blonde grabbed his head in pain before flopping back unceremoniously back onto the bed, turning his head so he could glare at Percy. He's sorry. Sigh, it's fine. So what made you feel the need to throw a book into the back of my head? Well, I'm studying for my Latin exam, but all of this is way too confusing. How the hell am I supposed to know the difference between Chiron and Charon? The blonde chuckled and said it's simple really, one has an A and the other has an I. Great, now you sound like Mr. Brunner. How are you so good at this stuff anyway? Don't you have ADHD and dyslexia like me? Naruto just flicked his nose and said with a smirk, now that be telling. But if you're really having that much of a problem with this, why don't you go and see Mr. Brunner? I'm sure he'd be more than willing to help if you asked. Yeah, alright, maybe hell let me see that sword again. Want to join me? Sure, after you woke me up, I seriously doubt that I could go back to sleep. Besides, I could use the stretch. After walking for a few minutes, the duo reached the faculty offices to see most of them doors closed and windows dark. They could see that Mr. Brunner had his door slightly open and there was light in the window. As they started to approach the door, voices became clear from the office. Worried about Percy and Naruto, sir. That was definitely Grover. The guy's voice was probably recognizable to anyone who had met him. Alone this summer, Grover was saying. I mean, a kindly one in the school. Now that we know for sure, and they know too. We would only make matters worse by rushing them, though I suspect Naruto already knows something Mr. Brunner said, but Percy needs to mature more. But he may not have time. The summer solstice deadline will have to be resolved without him, Grover. Let them enjoy their ignorance while they still can. Sir, they saw her. Their imagination, Mr. Brunner insisted. The mist over the students and staff will be enough to convince him of that. Naruto though is a completely different story. He had a celestial bronze blade and was using a fighting style that I don't recognize. He even recognized me. Grover paused before saying, sir, I can't fail in my duties again. His voice was choked with emotion. You know what that would mean. You haven't failed, Grover, Mr. Brunner said kindly. I should have seen her for what she was. Now let's just worry about keeping Percy alive till next fall and getting Naruto to camp. When Percy heard the part about keeping him alive, he dropped the book in his hands. Naruto saw this and grabbed the book before it hit the floor before whispering to Percy, I think we should get out of here. We just heard a conversation. I have a feeling that we weren't meant to. Percy nodded and followed Naruto back to their room. Half an hour later, Grover came upstairs to find Naruto yelling at Percy for hitting him in the head again. Grover's sweat dropped at this before asking, hey guys, what I miss? Oh, nothing except for this baka hitting me with his book multiple times, he said staring at the black-haired teen. Now I'm going to get some payback. After he said this he grinned demonically, which made Percy gulp and Grover shudder. Well, I'm going to get some studying done before I hit the hay. Have fun with that, Naruto. And Percy at this point he knelt and put his hands in a prayer position, may the gods have mercy upon your soul. Percy gulped again before Naruto grinned and made the hand signs for shadow clone jutsu. Latin paper style. All of a sudden, thousands of Latin papers fell onto Percy, who was effectively buried by the papers. Naruto let out an evil laugh that to this day still haunts people's dreams. On Olympus. The particular god was sitting at his rather large desk doing paperwork, which he felt like had been doing for millennia. When will this ever end? The god shouted to no one in particular. As if the fates had decreed this to happen, as soon as he said that a shiver ran up his spine. Why do I get the feeling that my son just made my life 10 times harder? He looked through a permanent iris link to see his son performing the shadow paper clone jutsu. As soon as he saw this, he jumped on top of his desk and yelled, "No, my son, don't go to the dark side." After he said this, the blonde let out his best evil laugh. "Oh, bad day, bad day, bad day." He started yelling, running in circles till he looked around and saw everyone laughing. "Don't laugh at me or I'll sick my son on you," he threatened. The room was immediately quiet. Naruto's father smiled and thought, well, even though I don't like it, it's certainly intimidating. Good job, kiddo. Back on Earth. Naruto sneezed and felt a warm breeze pass him by. He thought, why do I get the feeling Dad is proud of me for some reason? Oh well, he then went back to burying Percy in papers. The next day had gone by quickly. Naruto was doing backflips in the front yard, excited for the end of school. Percy was even somewhat happy. He was sure he had failed Brunner's test, but after the testing period ended he was called up and was congratulated on how well he did. Percy had a feeling that he owed Naruto for that. After school, Mr. Brunner had approached Percy and Naruto, telling Percy not to feel too bad about leaving Yancy and that it was probably for the best. Percy immediately thought the worst of what Brunner was trying to say before the blonde interrupted his reply and said, "Yeah, Perk. Don't take what he's saying the wrong way. You're getting a fresh start and I've decided that wherever you end up he'll go too. After all, we ADHD dyslexic kids got to stick together, right?" Percy smiled at that before thanking him and Brunner and dragging Naruto off to their room. As he was leaving, Naruto saw Mr. Brunner mouthing thanks and see you soon. Naruto nodded toward him and then left with Percy to meet up with Grover in their room. A few days later, everyone was ready to go. Naruto didn't have a suitcase, so he just went downstairs. He noticed a few guys talking about their vacation homes in Europe or the Hamptons. He just ignored them and went to the bus. A few minutes later, Grover and Percy came and sat in the seat behind him. The entire bus ride, Grover looked around like he was expecting an attack. About halfway through, Percy decided to tease Grover about what he and Naruto had heard a few nights ago. Looking for kindly ones? Grover nearly jumped out of his seat. Well, what do you mean? Percy confessed about eavesdropping on him and Mr. Brunner the night before the exam, while Naruto just listened. Grover's eye twitched. How much did you hear? Oh, not much. What's the summer solstice deadline? Naruto said. He winced. Look, Naruto, Percy, I was just worried for you, see? I mean, hallucinating about demon math teachers. Grover. And I was telling Mr. Brunner that maybe you were overstressed or something, because there was no such person as Mrs. Dodds, and… Grover, you're a really, really bad liar. Naruto said, and we never said she was a demon. His ears turned pink. From his shirt pocket, he fished out couple grubby business card. Just take these, okay? In case you guys need me this summer. The card was in fancy script, which was murder on the boys' dyslexic eyes, but after a few seconds, they both made out. Grover Underwood. Keeper. Half-Blood Hill. Long Island, New York. 800-009-0009. Thanks. Naruto said. What's half? Don't say it out loud. Grover hissed, it's a camp I go to for the summer. So you want us to come and visit you this summer? Yeah, or if you need me. Naruto just had to make a joke here. Whoa, G-man, I don't roll that way, and even if I did, it'd want a date first. Grover turned red with a mixture of embarrassment and rage, while Percy just put a hand over his mouth to keep from laughing. After he calmed down, he asked, so seriously, G-man, why would we need you? Well, to be honest, I'm supposed to protect you, both of you in fact. He said with a glare toward Naruto, who just started laughing. Percy though was paying close attention and asked, Grover, what exactly are you protecting us from? Just then there was a huge grinding noise under their feet. Black smoke poured from the dashboard and the whole bus filled with a smell like rotten eggs. The driver cursed and drove the bus over to the side of the highway. After a few minutes clanking around in the engine compartment, the driver announced that everyone would have to get off. Grover, Percy, and Naruto filed outside with everybody else. They were on a stretch of country road, no place you'd notice if you didn't break down there. On the side of the highway they were on, there was nothing but maple trees and litter from passing cars. On the other side, across 4 lanes of asphalt shimmering with afternoon heat was an old-fashioned fruit stand. The stand had a variety of fruits and vegetables, some looking as if they'd just been picked or plucked from the ground. There weren't any customers though, only 3 old ladies sitting there knitting. What they were knitting was a pair of giant electric blue socks. That wasn't the weirdest thing though. What was stranger was they were staring right at Percy. "Please don't tell me they're staring at him," Grover said. "Okay then, I won't," Naruto said. Just then, the old lady in the middle pulled out a giant pair of scissors. Grover cursed and said, "Come on, we're getting back on the bus." Across the road, the old ladies were still watching Percy. The middle one cut the yarn, and Naruto and Percy swore that they could hear that snip across 4 lanes of traffic. Then they turned and faced Naruto, who just glared at them. The old ladies looked frightened for a moment before they balled up the socks and left. At the rear of the bus, the driver wrenched a big chunk of smoking metal out of the engine compartment. The bus shuddered, and the engine roared back to life. "Damn right," he yelled. "All right, the bus to New York is back in service. Everyone back on board." As soon as they got back on the bus, Grover started cussing. Shit, they never make it past 6th. Never. "Hey G-man, what's up?" Naruto asked. "What did you two see?" Well, they were looking at Perk. Here, they snipped some yarn with a giant pair of scissors. At this, Grover turned white. And while they were looking at Naruto, Percy continued, "Well, they looked at him and turned white, or pale, either way they looked scared." As soon as Percy finished, Grover fainted. "Well, this was interesting," Naruto mused. They got into the city about half an hour later, at which time Grover woke up. Grover made Naruto and Percy promise to walk them home, but when he left for the bathroom, they grabbed a cab and left. Naruto left Grover a note telling him that he was perfectly capable of protecting Percy and to ask Mr. C about it. When they reached Percy's apartment, Naruto paid the cab driver and followed Percy upstairs. He was expecting the smell, but not Gabe's appearance. He looked bad the last time he saw him, but this time he looked like a walrus. Oh, how tempted he was to go walrus hunting. "So you're home, and you brought the blonde brat. Where's my mom?" "Working, got any cash?" "No." "You took a taxi from the bus station," he said. "Probably paid with a 20, got 6, $7 and change. Somebody expects to live under this roof, he ought to carry his own weight. Am I right, Eddie?" Eddie, the super of the apartment building, looked at Percy with a twinge of sympathy. "Come on, Gabe," he said. "The kid just got here." "Am I right?" Gabe repeated. Eddie scowled into his bowl of pretzels. The other 2 guys passed gas in harmony. "Actually, I'm the one that paid, and he really doesn't have any money. Though you could try and win it off of me," Naruto said with a smirk. Percy was smiling slightly. Anyone who bet against the blonde would lose. It wasn't a lucky streak, it was a fact. And Gabe took the bait. "Sure brat, pull up a chair." "I hope you lose, Gabe." "Hey, don't get snooty with me. Your report card came last week." Percy just grumbled and went to his room with his suitcase. "So what's dealing?" 30 minutes later, Sally Jackson came in with a bag of candy. What she saw shocked her. Naruto had won not only over $35,000, but the guys were all betting their last resorts. Abe had bet his car, Eddie bet his deed to the building, and the other 2 had bet the deed to an electronics store in Midtown, as well as a yacht in the harbor. "Hey Mrs. J," the blonde said. "Naruto, what are you doing?" "Cleaning house. Why don't you go check on Percy, Hess in his room. It'll be done in a minute." After he said this, he went all in, causing the other men to smirk. Sally just sighed and went to Percy's room. When she got there, she saw Percy on his bed. He seemed to be awake but had his eyes closed. "Percy?" "Mom?" For the next 10 minutes they discussed how the year had been till Percy came home. She saw that he was holding something back, but she didn't press the matter. "Hey Percy, I have a surprise for you," she said, "we're going to the beach." Percy's eyes widened. "Montauk?" She smiled and said, 3 nights, same cabin. "Cool. Can Naruto come?" She laughed at that. "Honestly, with the way the boy is mopping up, I don't think we could go without him." Percy smirked at that. "So when do we leave?" "As soon as I get changed and Naruto finishes." A few minutes later, Sally was ready to leave, and so was Percy. When they left the bedroom, what they saw shocked them. Naruto had the keys to the car, deeds and keys to a yacht, an electronics shop and the building, as well as a plasma TV, the keys to a Mercedes-Benz E63 AMG, a few dozen stock options, and all the money he had 15 minutes ago. "Hey guys, ready to go?" he asked. Sure Naruto, but where are you going to put all of this?" "Don't worry about it. I'll have a few movers and lawyers come by to finalize all of this tomorrow." Turning toward the still shocked poker buddies, he said, "Nice doing business with you gentlemen," before turning on his heel and walking out the door. After a few minutes he poked his head back in and asked, where are we going?" Naruto was chilling in the back of his new Camaro listening to his music on his iPod. It may be his car, but it had been months since Percy and his mom had seen each other, so he was just rocking to Imagine Dragons. He couldn't drive either, so he didn't mind sitting in the back. The car may have been Gabe's pride and joy, but the inside was trashy, or at least in the back. There were beer cans, half-eaten bags of potato chips, and a few lotto tickets surrounding Naruto's feet. Eventually getting tired of the feeling, he activated a Kaiten jutsu to burn everything to ashes and a wind jutsu to get rid of it through the window. After about a 2-hour drive, they finally got to the beach. The rental cabin was on the south shore, way out at the tip of Long Island. It was a little pastel box with faded curtains, half sunken into the dunes. Evidently there was always sand in the sheets, and the sea was usually too cold to swim in. All in all to Naruto it seemed like a rather odd place to take a vacation. After getting there, Sally seemed like years of stress and worry had been lifted off her shoulders. By the time they got everything unpacked and set up it had gotten dark. Both Percy and Sally had gone to find firewood in an area near the coast, telling Naruto to find materials to start the fire. By the time they got back, they were surprised to see that Naruto already had a fire going, using some old wood he found behind the cabin. So they set down the extra firewood and began to roast hot dogs and marshmallows. Naruto was a surprisingly good cook, they found, as any hot dog he roasted was perfectly cooked. Percy was more surprised to learn that he ate more than ramen. After chowing down for a bit, Mrs. Jackson began to regale them both with stories from when she was a kid and the stories she wanted to write after she had enough money to quit the candy shop. Naruto offered to give her a loan and she said she would think about it. After a while, Percy got the nerve to ask his mom about his father. He was kind, Percy, she said, tall, handsome, and powerful. But gentle, too. You have his black hair, you know, and his green eyes. I wish he could see you, Percy. He'd be so proud. How old was I? Percy asked. I mean, when he left. She watched the flames. He was only with me for 1 summer, Percy. Right here at this beach. This cabin. But, he knew me as a baby. No, honey. He knew I was expecting a baby, but he never saw you. He had to leave before you were born. Percy looked sad and slightly angry at that, so trying to clear the tension she turned to Naruto, who was looking at the stars and asked, what about you, Naruto? I haven't heard you talk about your parents. Percy looked at the blonde with interest, snapping him out of his brooding. He hadn't heard the blonde talking about his family at all since he met him. The only thing he said was that the sword pen he had was a gift from his father. Naruto's side rose from his comfortable position on the sand to look at the Jacksons. Honestly, I don't know too much about them. I was born in a small town in the country. Mom and dad were both war heroes. Evidently my mom was really feisty and was nicknamed the Red Hot Habanero. Her name was Kushina. She died the night I was born. Sally and Percy looked down at this, my dad died the same night. His name was Minato, and evidently he was a natural commander. I don't know the details about what happened, but someone killed them both. After a few seconds of uncomfortable silence Percy asked, so who do you live with, Naruto? Well, I've lived on my own since I was 7. Both Percy and Sally looked shocked at this, by getting support from the state as well as the man I see as my grandfather, but I haven't seen him for about half a year now. I have more to tell, but it's rather emotional for me, so I'd rather not talk about it anymore. That's fine, Naruto, we understand. Well, I think it's about time to turn in. I'm heading to bed. You two don't stay up too much longer, alright? Yes, Mom, Mrs. J, the boys replied. Percy stayed up for about another half hour before he went to bed. Naruto decided to stay out for a bit before he went to bed so he could see the stars. That was one of his favorite things to do when he was younger. He would often climb to the top of the fourth's head, lie down, and look at the stars. He always felt at peace when he did that. He hadn't done this in a while though, as the light pollution from the city acted like a blind. You could see a few stars on a good night, but unless there was a major blackout you couldn't see anything. Even from where he was, there was still some light pollution, but it wasn't as bad, so he was able to make out some constellations like the Big and Little Dipper, Orion, and Ursa Major. The constellations didn't change between the dimensions, though they did have different names, but Naruto could still make them out easily in the night sky. He was startled from his thoughts by a noise coming from the shore. It wasn't a wave or something hitting the beach, Naruto could tell that much. Getting up to find the source of the noise, he saw what looked to be a white baby fox sitting on the sand wagging its tail. As soon as it spotted Naruto it started yipping at him. Hi. It just yipped in reply. Hey Kura-chan, do you know what he's saying? He asked his tenant. Right there Naruto, that feels so good. Naruto blushed heavily and realized that she was still asleep, so he gave her a mental nudge to wake her up. It's too early, Naruto-kun. 5 more minutes. Naruto sighed and said, sure Kura-chan, you can sleep as long as you want after you help me with the fox. Hey, alright she said, so long as you let me sleep after this. Deal. So what's it saying? He says that big things are about happen and that he has a summoning contract for you. Does he understand English? I don't know, why don't you ask him, you baka? Kerr replied. Naruto sweat dropped at his own stupidity before he asked the fox, can you understand me? The fox yipped in reply, which Kerr translated to mean yes. Great. So where's the summoning contract you want me to sign? The fox yipped again, and suddenly a scroll popped into existence in front of it. The contract was obviously old and worn out. It had a silver fox head on either end and was sealed by a fox whose tail seemed to wrap around the scroll entirely. Picking up the scroll and opening it gently, the first thing Naruto noticed was that the characters weren't in English or Japanese, but in a combination of Greek and Japanese. Much more importantly, it seemed as if he was the first one to sign the contract. Somewhat still in awe of the honor, he bit his thumb and signed Naruto Uzumaki in blood. As soon as he finished, the scroll rolled up and disappeared with a poof. The fox looked at the new summoner and bowed slightly before yipping, so can you understand me now without your tenant's help? Naruto nodded and was going to thank Kura, but he realized that she was already asleep, so he mentally created a blanket and covered her with it before returning his focus back to the fox. Good. I don't know why the boss wanted you to sign our contract now, but he did. We were going to approach you next year, but this works. Well, I'll ask him when I summon him. So why are you still here? The fox seemed to facepalm himself before he said, I take it you can't read ancient Greek yet, can you? No. Well, if you were able to read it, you would have found out that I'm going to be your familiar. What that means is that whenever you summon, it'll be the first one that you can summon. It also means that as your power grows, mine does too. Considering that you're already pretty powerful, it'll probably be the size of a car when I get back to Mount Surai. Damn, that's gonna hurt. Naruto rubbed the back of his head sheepishly and said, sorry. By the way, what's your name? How could I forget that? My name is Torekisut, but my friends just call me Tori. The fox said while scratching behind his ear. Well, it's nice to meet you, Tori. I look forward to being your best summoner, believe it. The fox chuckled and said, I'm sure you will be Naruto-kun. Before you go though, the Fox clan has 2 rules. The first is that we are extremely loyal to our friends, so if you betray one, we'll excommunicate you. Naruto nodded in understanding. The second one is if you ever say anything about the power of youth or wear a green jumpsuit without good reason, we will excommunicate you and very possibly eat you. Naruto paled at the thought of someone who would actually do that. Meanwhile in Konoha 2 shouts of youth were heard, giving everyone who was still asleep nightmares and woke a lot of people in a cold sweat. Back in our world, Naruto got a shiver down his spine that shook him to the core. Alright, I shouldn't have a problem with either of those rules. Cool. Well, I think it's about time that you got to bed. And I need to get back home. Alright, well I'll see you around, Tori. The fox gave Naruto a mock salute and dispelled, and Naruto went back to the cabin, thinking about what the boss fox was like. When he finally calmed down enough to go to sleep, he had a rather odd dream. He was on a beach, with Percy standing next to him and a storm coming toward them. 2 animals, a white horse and a golden eagle, were trying to kill each other at the edge of the surf. The eagle swooped down and slashed the horse's muzzle with its huge talons. The horse reared up and kicked at the eagle's wings. As they fought, the ground rumbled and a monstrous voice chuckled somewhere beneath the earth, goading the animals to fight harder. Suddenly Percy started running toward them and tried to say something, but he disappeared before he could make a sound. What happened next was even weirder. The eagle and the horse stopped fighting as whirlpools started in the water. The eagle, the horse and a previously unnoticed raven all turned to look at it. A flash happened and replaced were the 3 animals with 3 men with their backs toward Naruto. Then another flash occurred and a man appeared where there used to be a whirlpool. He was wearing a cloak with a thunderbolt on the right arm and the moon on the left. Naruto couldn't see his face, but the man had blonde hair like his own. As he walked up to the 3 men, a loud rumbling was heard somewhere to Naruto's left. The 4 men looked at each other and then they turned and sprinted off toward it. Then lightning struck right in front of Naruto and the dream ended, leaving Naruto feeling very happy for some reason. When Naruto awoke he realized that he wasn't in the cabin anymore. Instead he was in the back of his Camaro laying his feet on top of Grover. Ugh, what happened? Naruto asked groggily. Hey man, it's about time you woke up. Percy yelled from up front. Percy, stop yelling. This isn't the time. Mrs. J scolded. It's still behind us. Grover yelled. Wait a minute. What the hell is going on? And why does Grover have goat legs? Naruto yelled. We're being chased. And him a satyr. Grover replied. Oh, alright, Naruto said as if it didn't surprise him at all. By who? Who are we being chased by? Percy asked. "Oh, nobody much," Grover said, "just the Lord of the Dead and a few of his bloodthirstiest minions." "Grover. Sorry Mrs. Jackson. Could you drive faster, please?" Mrs. J made a hard left. They swerved onto a narrower road, racing past darkened farmhouses and wooded hills, and pick your own strawberry signs on white picket fences. "So where are we going?" Naruto asked, obviously stealing ready for combat. "We're heading to the camp I told you about. Yeah, I'll be safe there." Mrs. J seemed to choke up on that. "Mom, is this camp the one that Dad wanted to send me to?" Percy asked with concern evident in his voice. "Yes," she answered quietly. "Mrs. J, look out." Naruto yelled. Turning her attention back to the road, she pulled the wheel hard to the right and they got a glimpse of a figure swerved to avoid a dark fluttering shape now lost behind them in the storm. "What was that?" Percy asked. "We're almost there," Mrs. J said, ignoring his question. "Another mile. Please. Please. Please." It looked like Percy was about to ask something to his mother, but before he could, there was a flash, a big noise that sounded like freight trains colliding, and then the car exploded. "Oh my head," Naruto said as he peeled his head off of the driver's seat. "Percy?" Mrs. J shouted. "I'm fine, Mom," he said. They'd swerved into a ditch. The driver's side doors were wedged in the mud. The roof had cracked open like an eggshell, and rain was pouring in. "Hey G-man, you alright?" Naruto asked as he shook the saddle. Foodie said in a dazed state. "Good, hell be alright," Naruto thought. "Percy, Naruto, head to the top of the hill. The one with the big pine tree." Mrs. J yelled over the thunder. As if on cue, the lightning illuminated the pine tree, which was big enough to be the White House Christmas tree. Unfortunately, it also illuminated a really big guy with horns who was heading straight for them. On the other side, there's a farmhouse. "Run in there and get help," she yelled. "We aren't leaving you, Mom," Percy yelled. "You have to. I can't come with you," she yelled. "Mrs. J, leaving people behind isn't my style. If you can't pass that tree, then help Percy carry Grover to it and then stay as close to it as you can," Naruto said, his battle instincts taking over. "But what are you going to do?" Percy asked. "It'll hold this guy off until you can get help. But you can't do that. If you do, you'll." Naruto just looked at both of them before grabbing his pen and saying, "Go. Now." Mrs. J just nodded, but Percy looked like he was going to protest, that is until Naruto kicked the stuck door open with pure strength. Percy was startled at that, but he had no time to watch the blonde, he had to help Grover and his mother to the top of the hill. Naruto saw his friends and Mrs. J get out before charging off to meet the Minotaur. "Hey. Beefcakes. Come get some," he yelled. Beefcakes, who had been smelling the air, barely heard the blonde, but heard him nonetheless and charged towards him. "Olé." The blonde yelled as he jumped over the cowman, planting a foot between his horns. Unfortunately for him, the bullman kept running until he hit the car, which ended up skidding across the road and igniting the gas tank, causing quite the spectacular explosion, much to the chagrin of the blonde. "Hey Beefcakes. That was my car," he yelled. He wasn't listening though. He was smelling the air again until he smelled Percy and his mother. "Shit." Naruto cursed. "Percy, Mrs. J, look out," he yelled. They looked to see the bullman charging at them and quickly separated. It seemed to want Percy though and kept chasing him. He lowered his horns to strike, but Percy jumped out of the way just in time. The bullman roared in frustration and turned his sights on Mrs. J, who had reached the top of the hill and was laying Grover down in the grass. He charged and caught Mrs. J by the throat. Naruto managed to get up to where they were at this point, but couldn't do anything to help. He really didn't want to risk anyone's life with his sword. So he did the only thing possible. He waited. "Mom." Mrs. J, Percy and Naruto yelled out. She caught his eye and managed to yell go. Before the monster closed his fist around her neck. There was a flash of light and then she was gone. The monster then turned toward Grover and was about to pick him up before Percy did something really stupid. He took off his red jacket and started running around the bullman. "Shit." Naruto said as he watched the Minotaur charge toward Percy with his arms wide. He knew that Percy would be caught if he tried to dodge like last time and was about to do something drastic to save his friend. But at the last moment he managed to jump over the bullman's charge and grab his neck. It would have been amusing to see Percy getting thrown around like he was at the rodeo if it weren't for the serious situation. As Percy was hanging on for dear life, Naruto was planning his next move. He was going to charge at the bullman and take it down as soon as Percy managed to get off. Beefcakes wheeled around and Percy was starting to lose his grip, so he grabbed one of his horns and yanked it off with a snap. Beefcakes bellowed in rage and flung Percy, who hit his head on a rock. Beefcakes was about to charge at Percy, but Naruto saw his chance and jumped over the bullman's head with his sword to his left and effectively cut off the bullman's other horn, which fell to the ground beside him. Naruto landed between the bullman and Percy, who was staying awake but only barely, and took a basic sword stance. An sword straight in front held by both hands, sharpened edge facing opponent. Percy, stay down. I'll handle it from here. He said to Percy, who looked relieved. Beefcakes was infuriated at having his other horn cut off and started charging at the blonde, seeing only red. In a burst of speed, Naruto appeared behind Beefcakes, which awed Percy who was just barely staying awake and sheathed his katana, whispering katana no jujutsu. Ichi sent Tsutoreki as he did. Beefcakes didn't move for a second before he turned into a pile of golden dust that started blowing in the wind. Naruto walked over to his horn and picked it up, sealed it, and then created a clone to grab Grover while he got Percy. As he approached Percy, he could tell that he had a concussion and was obviously shaken about seeing his mother disappear in front of him. He was still holding the horn that had broken off of the Minotaur's head. Hey Perk. Relax. Everything will be fine. I promise that we'll find a way to get your mom back, alright? Percy nodded before he was picked up by Naruto bridal style. The last thing he remembered was Naruto arriving with him at a building and Naruto calling for help. This is it for today, to be continued.